Okay, welcome to the Brisbane Writers Festival Publishing Panel, all about what are publishers looking for in YA. We are joined by Kate Stevens, who is an associate publisher of children's books at Hachette Australia. She publishes a small list of children's and YA titles with a focus on debut authors and artists that include Jennifer Cossins, Lysra Rose, Karen Comer, Mulga the Artist, Sian Donthes, and me, Danielle Binks. Say hi, Kate.
Hi guys, so I'm coming to you from Hachette Australia's Meanjin headquarters, which is on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people in Brisbane, and so happy to be on this panel.
Thank you, Kate. We also have Zoe Walton, who is a publisher of books for young readers at Penguin Random House Australia. Zoe edits New York Times bestseller John Flanagan, whose Ranger's Apprentice and Brother Band series have sold 15 million copies worldwide. That's 15 million copies worldwide. She has recently published popular and award-winning Australian YA authors, including Tristan Banks, Anne Liang, Mike Lucas, Tobias Madden, Lynette Noni, Tom Taylor, John Somariva, and Stuart Wilson. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, so happy to be here. And I'm recording today from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Thank you, Zoe. We also have Anna McFarlane, who during her 30-year career, Anna has published many best-selling authors and illustrators and worked for several publishing houses. At Allen and Unwin, Anna has published picture books for early readers, middle grade fiction such as A Girl Called Corpse by Reese Carter and Dragon Skin by Karen Foxley, and a number of best-selling and award-winning young adult fiction titles. Recent YA successes include the CBCA shortlisted graphic novel The Greatest Thing by Sarah Winifred Searle, New York Times bestselling series The Aurora Cycle and the Illuminae Files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, and Two Can Play That Game by Leanne Young. Hi, Anna.
Hi, everybody. I'm coming to you from the Allen and Unwin office on Camera Gold Country in Darragland.
And my name, your host, your moderator, is Danielle Binks. I am a literary agent at the Melbourne boutique agency Jacinta de Marze Management. I'm also the author of middle grade book The Year the Maps Changed, published by Kate, who joins us today, and the YA book The Monster of Her Age. And I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to elders past and present, and we do recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you three for letting me talk your ears off today on behalf of Brisbane Writers Festival, but really I'm just going to get the most out of it. I think the way we should kick off, I'm going to put Zoe in the hot seat for the first question, but we're going to do a bit of a round robin, round table. But the question I have is, because once upon a time, we didn't have young adult literature. I mean, once upon a time, we didn't even have teenagers, speaking socioeconomically. So I'm just curious, since there was a time period where we didn't have YA and literature for teenagers or teenagers, imagine that. What is YA today, and how do you define young adult literature? Beginning with Zoe, please.
That is such a big question. And if I can start with a really silly answer, it's whatever books we think will sell best on the YA shelves at the bookshop. And because it's really broad these days, I think, as well. But in generally speaking, we would say that it's books for kind of your 12 to 18-year-olds predominantly. Of course, we also know that YA is read by a lot of adults as well. So it's a very broad readership. YA tends to be books that have got kind of deeper themes than books for younger readers. There's a focus on things like relationships and kind of really about finding your place in the world. And, you know, whether that's at high school or whether it's a fantasy world and you're going off to become an apprentice or an assassin or whatever it is.
I think that's a really good definition. Does anyone else have anything to add? Is there a secret ingredient we need to say is definitely in YA so as to be labeled thus? Kate and Anna, anything to add?
I agree with what Zoe said, and maybe we'll just add that, like, generally speaking, the protagonist in YA is usually of a certain age. So you'd normally find a protagonist aged between about 13 and 17, I think, in YA books.
No 45-year-old protagonists in YA, please. Teenagers probably not going to spend too long reading that.
I also think that it's about agency too, like who in the story has the agency and to tell the story. I actually love this subject because I can talk about it for quite a long time, because there are a lot of books that do have teenage protagonists that end up not being YA, and There are books that have protagonists that are 10 or 11 that do end up being YA as well. It is a really mercurial category in a way, because it is so broad and can cover so many different reading experiences. But I also agree, I completely agree with both Kate and Zoe, but one of the things I do agree with Zoe is that it's kind of about the reading experience. There has to be something in there that you think is going to particularly connect with a person in their teenage years. But it doesn't, you know, it doesn't kind of cover everything. But yeah, I love to think of the Lonely Bones and Alice Sebold, which is a 13-year-old protagonist, which, you know, I would never suggest that be published for a teenager, though I'm really happy for teenagers to seek it out. But I feel the intention there was for an adult reader. So that's something else I also weigh up, is like, who's the author writing for?
I love that. And if any particularly interested parties listening to this want to go forth and do a little bit more research, you can go and look up the very German sounding word, because it is a German word, Bildungsroman, which basically is just shorthand for coming of age. It's that transitional period from childhood to young adulthood and slight adulthood. So it's got that coming of age element to some degree in all of YA, you know, to various degrees or not. But definitely there is always a certain coming of age aspect, but I think all of you have completely hit on that perfectly. So thank you for that. Now that we've all gotten on the same page about what is YA, and our listeners have as well, I would like to acknowledge that in Australia in particular, in very recent years, probably since like 2015, 2016, we've also started talking about middle grade literature, because we've always had children's books, which was everything from board books for babies to picture books to early chapter books. And then we sort of leapt ahead and said children's books and then YA. But in recent years, we've kind of borrowed the term from America that have junior school, middle school, and high school. And because of algorithm, and we're all shopping online and metadata, etc., we've adopted the term middle grade literature as well. And I'm just curious, as a definition, because, you know, if you talk about books for middle grade, middle school, what we would call primary school and upper primary perhaps in Australia, there can also be degrees of coming of age and growing up. So I'm just curious if perhaps Kate could answer the question, why do we have distinct categories of children's, middle grade now, and YA? Why are they distinct and different? Why do we even say that there is an age range for these different readerships? How does that help anyone?
Look, I think it's helpful, not just for readers, but for booksellers, librarians, teachers, and also parents. So just, you know, going off what Zoe was talking about with intended audience for YA, I guess the intended audience for middle grade is sort of like more 8 or 9 to 12. And we've also separated it a little bit into like lower middle grade, upper middle grade, like you'll hear those terms bandied about as well. I think, you know, as I was talking about the age of the protagonists in young adult books, in middle grade books, generally you would also have a younger protagonist. And I think also in middle grade books, in terms of length, they do tend to be a little bit shorter. So you're probably talking 40 to 50K for a middle grade novel, as opposed to, you know, 50 to 70 for a YA book. So I'd say they're the main differences, but the most important one is the intended audience. So who the author is writing for, and that they're writing themes that would be of interest to that audience and in a way that's sensitive to the age of the audience.
Yeah, that's perfect. I think intention that Anna mentioned is really important as well. Anna and Zoe, do you have anything to add about why do we need all these readerships? Why can't kids just read whatever they want? And they can. There's no, you know, you must be this high to read this book attached to bookshelves. But why do publishers insist on telling us that something is middle grade or YA? Do you have anything to add to that, Anna and Zoe?
I'll take it. I think that I don't think readers really know I don't think they buy by age category anyway. So I don't think that they, you know, go into a library or a bookshop and think, okay, where's my category? I think they are, you know, very much led by what their friends have been reading, perhaps what they've heard of, perhaps what the bookseller recommends to them, or the librarian, or a familiar name, or a nice jacket. And the category is only useful for the bookseller and for the gatekeeper, really. I think that's its primary function. It's not really for the reader at all, which is why I think there's always been resistance about putting reading ages on books in most territories. But, you know, in Australia, that conversation's come up from time to time at different companies I've worked in. And it's because the readership is just a recommendation. And we know kids read really broadly and often out of their category or their age category, or and we also want them to be able to access books. So if their reading ability isn't up to, you know, some of the books that are 10 to 14-year-olds and they're 12, you know, that they can find something that's going to interest them, that's maybe pitched a bit younger, but they don't know that. So yeah, so I don't think the categories are used by readers so much. It's really just there for the, you know, for the people who need that kind of data, which are primarily librarians and booksellers.
So do you agree?
Yeah, kind of with both. Like, we do very much use those categories. We've got, so for us, it's kind of junior fiction for ages 6 to 8. It's middle grade is 9 to 12. We have kind of some books we call upper middle grade, which is for your kind of years 5 and 6 of primary, but also lower secondary, which is books like Tristan Banks' Two Wolves and Cop and Robber, really fast paced, but also with really deep themes as well. Something really interesting in terms of categories is the fact that we used to try and have different categories for teen and YA, and teen was the kind of younger ones. But I think in the market, there's just not that distinction. So we have to find other ways to distinguish what's kind of YA for younger readers, and that maybe that's on the cover and kind of what we do with the marketing and all of that kind of thing, versus what these days can be, you know, quite a lot older and have, you know, some adult themes in YA as well. So there's kind of, it's a tricky age to get that readership right in terms of how we pitch it.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of this is on the creator themselves, so that you are getting the right language for the right age that you're writing for. So it's not by accident that a book appeals to a certain readership. It's because the author or the creator, the illustrator, has intended it that way. They've really thought about the audience. They've really considered that, oh, maybe really young kids can't deal with violence. There's not going to be any swearing for really young kids, but upper YA potentially can have a little bit more of the nefarious stuff, not too much, still keeping it clean teen to a degree. So there is that thought and intention behind it with the creator from the moment of conception, from really coming up with the idea. But Zoe, to put you back in the hot seat, you said that categories are getting a little bit fuzzy. They tend to be because, as Anna and Kate both said as well, it's more for gatekeepers that we have these readerships. There is a new category that I see readers and some writers really trying to push the idea of, which is new adult. The new adult category, which is kind of a suggestion of the R-rated stuff. All of the R-rated stuff that YA takes out, new adult leaves in. And there's an assumption that new adult is characters in their early 20s, first years of university. I see a lot of writers, given that I'm a literary agent, and a lot of readers talking about new adult and aligning it very closely with YA, as though it's the next stepping stone. Before proper adult literature, we have YA, young adult, new adult, and then adult. But Zoe, how accurate is that to say the publishers are seeking out new adult, or is this more of a reader-led movement? Can you comment on that?
Oh, look, new adult has such a history to it, even though it's only been around for less than 10 years. I think it, you know, as you would know, Danielle, it started off at I think a particular publishing house in the US, and it was meant to be that first years of uni or college, first moving out of home, those kind of first adult experiences. And then for a while, it moved into being a particular kind of subgenre of quite steamy romances for, you know, that age. And some of them were quite dark as well. And often more so in your self-published kind of categories as well. So in a way, we've steered away from new adult, I think, for the last few years. And we're seeing it come back now in that way, as you said, of being a more general category. I don't think I would be looking specifically for something called new adult at the moment, but I would be looking for some of the books that might be called that category. I just probably wouldn't I wouldn't call them new adult, but I would be interested to publish them either as YA, or we could look at adult, you know, depending what the themes are. We are definitely seeing YA get a lot steamier in some ways as well. And I think that's come about as well because of there's certain of the biggest selling authors like your Sarah J. Maas or Leigh Bardugo who started in YA but have since kind of gone into adult with their fiction. And I think it's really broadened out kind of that readership and kind of made it a little bit harder to tell, you know, what is this YA, is this adult, and particularly in that fantasy genre, I think.
Yeah. Kate, what do you think? Are you looking for books that can be marketed for all ages? It can be read by teenagers and by adults, and it's for teenagers, but the sexy stuff is left in. Are you actually pursuing new adult? Is it a term that's bandied about in the publishing offices at Hachette?
Danielle, I'm not really looking for it, to be honest. So I guess I think of it more as a subgenre of adult romance, rather than YA. And I guess what you said is absolutely right, that it is seen as like a stepping stone between young adult books and adult romance books. But for me, you know, the protagonist is older. It's that campus type novel that you were talking about. So it's not fitting into my idea of YA. Although I would say I do think there's a fair bit of crossover sometimes between the voice. So you might have like a similar voice in new adult and YA. And in terms of your question about R-rated stuff in YA, I think that's an interesting question. I feel like there seems to be a little bit more of it in fantasy YA. I feel like you can get away with leaving a little bit more of that in when the book might be set in a world where, you know, our rules don't apply or where ages might not be explicitly stated. But yeah, for me, new adults not really on my radar, to be honest.
Okay, Anna, are you going to be a taker of new adult? Are you pursuing new adult?
Oh, I would have argued that it's not a thing anymore, to be honest. I know maybe it's just Allen and Unwin, but it's definitely not a category that we use. I mean, all categories are shorthand, right? They're all to help communicate. And either we've not had something that we feel needs to be recategorized, or it's either adult or it's YA for us. But for me, it was like a euphemism for keeping the sex scene in. That was what the what it meant when it sort of first came out. It sort of meant spicy, but I'm not looking for it, but I do think that I have got novels on my list that are they are first year uni novels. You know, Nina Kenwood is first year, not that she's published by us, but, you know, they're first year uni books, and I think they're YA. And so, you know, it's so blurry. And also I'm really pro, like, let's have some sex in our books, because you know, especially positive sex, I feel like that's a really great thing for kids to read. So, you know, older teenagers to read. But so, you know, I don't know, that's probably not very helpful to a budding writer, except I think it's okay to, you know, like sometimes that can come out in the editing process anyway. You sort of work out who your ideal reader is, and is this particular scene, you know, really important to keep in, or is it going to kind of lose you with your core readership? So often those decisions are made really when you come down to sort of the nitty gritty and you're in the editorial process.
Yeah, I think sex can serve a really big purpose in YA because it's a first. And you know what? Judy Blume revolutionized the inclusion of sex in YA way back in the 70s. So let's keep up and keep dedicating that to Judy Blume, who did say that she wrote, I believe it was Forever, because her teenage daughter had said, I really just want to read a book where teenagers have sex and they don't die. That would be great. Yeah, that would be amazing. And like, you know, let's pay tribute to that. But sex inclusion in YA has a story purpose, and it's written for teenagers with teenagers in mind. Whereas I think what Kate and Zoe and yourself are saying is that the assumption with new adult is it is steamier, and it is for adults. It's from the adult perspective of sex, which is lustful, slightly erotic. And we have to be aware that there is kind of boundaries in writing for teenagers. You don't want to be an adult writing sex scenes with young bodies and that being creepy in any way, you have to be really aware of who your audience is. And particularly in young adult books, where you can have readers who are as young potentially as 13 coming to your books, depending on what sort of reader they are and if they want to try it out. So you have to be aware of that. And I think once you know that the history of new adult, yes, it was a US of course it was a US publisher, right? So of course it was a US publisher that tried to do a whole gambit and didn't really work out. But it started from 50 Shades of Grey. Which the first book of 50 Shades of Grey, being that the character was a university student, that kind of spawned that whole self-publishing, indie publishing, romantic subtrope of people in university getting it on. So it's not really a requisite of YA, I would say. However, I think one of the reasons that the category has been muddied slightly, and why I certainly get writers coming to me saying that they're writing new adult, you're all probably getting submissions saying that they're writing new adult. One of the reasons I think, and Anna, I'm going to lob this one at you, is the kind of Australian and US markets, and particularly how they're being impacted by social media at the moment. And the big one, the behemoth of social media that is having the most impact on word of mouth and pushing books up the bestseller list is undoubtedly TikTok. And to give listeners some insight into how big a successful TikTok author whose word of mouth is pushing their book up the sales ranks can be, Colleen Hoover, who is not YA, but is often incorrectly attributed as YA because clearly young people are reading her because young people are on TikTok and being influenced. Colleen Hoover, as of October 2022, has sold approximately 20 million books worldwide. And another big TikTok trend book, which is YA, is Alice Oseman's graphic novel Heartstopper, which has just clocked in at 6 million sales worldwide. So these are the kind of big numbers we're talking about here. But Anna, how accurate? Well, first of all, let's talk about, can we see through the lens of TikTok the differences between the US and Australian markets? And how accurate are these big numbers of sales for what the rest of YA is going through right now? Like, is everyone selling Colleen Hoover numbers? Can you tackle that one, Anna?
Yes. No. It's a really great thing to point out, Danielle. So, but the YA market's always been really susceptible to trends and platforms and over the years. But to answer your first question, the books that are doing, I mean, TikTok is word of mouth, and word of mouth has always sold books, and TikTok is word of mouth on steroids. So it's just like bigger, deeper, it's just the most amazing figures. And I know that I think we've all probably got something on that's on the top 10 at the moment, and the depth of sales, it just seems impossible that it doesn't stop. It just grows and grows and grows. And it can show you just how big an audience can be, which is really exciting. But it is really only about, it's not something that we can manipulate. So we are just in the mercy of the word of mouth machine. And of course, everyone is trying to manipulate it. But I don't know anyone who's been successful yet. And it is really blurring, I think, what is YA and what is for adults, because there are books that look like, I bought Red, White and Royal Blue because I thought it was a YA book, and then I read it and I thought, this isn't YA. I mean, it's fabulous.
Yeah.
But there is a trend there, the packaging and the pricing, it's all being priced down quite around the kind of the YA price point. So it is really hard to kind of go through that list of what's selling, especially when it's in your bookstore and you see the BookTok successes, like what's going to be good for your 14-year-old and what's not at all appropriate for you to give them. I mean, I'm sure they'll probably find them themselves. But prior to TikTok, there was we'd always say there's the platform. So you'd have the person who had the movie tie-in, or the author who had the movie tie-in, and suddenly you'd see kind of those books be successful. And there was the John Green effect, which was 2010. It's like everything John Green wrote was massively successful. But it had to be written by John Green. It's not like you could say, no, you write a book about a girl who's got cancer, and it's bound to do. That's not the thing. It was the John Green platform that was just kind of connecting so much with teenagers. So I don't know, does that answer your question? Oh, I know what else you're asking, is that is the similarity between the Australian and the and the American market? Is that where we find the similarities? And the answer to that is absolutely categorically yes. And in fact, when we had a presentation recently with BookScan, you can see across a lot of English-speaking countries the successes are the same, and they're all TikTok led at the moment. So, so that's true of our market too.
Yeah, is that, yeah. I mean,
but YA has always sold less volume. I mean, I've done presentations in the past where I've tried to show with a pie chart, you know, where the volume is in the Australian children's market. And generally the volume's very rarely been in YA. You can have your outliers who do really well, but ultimately the volume week by week is much lower than the volume that you get for what they call junior fiction, which is kind of, you know, everything from middle grade right down to chapter book and to picture book itself. So yeah, so YA is not like a ticket to write your own kind of multi-million-dollar check. Absolutely not.
For our listeners at home, Zoe and Kate, is that true? You can't become a Colleen Hoover selling millions of books and become a multi-millionaire. Is that true, really?
Well, you never know. You know, maybe. I think one of the, you know, I think I agree with everything Anna said about TikTok, but I think one of the interesting things is how it is changing what and how we publish, you know, in some ways. And for instance, one example I can give is that a couple of years ago, if I was taking, you know, a fantastic new YA manuscript to our acquisitions meeting, I would never have used the word trope because I would think, oh, that's just, you know, saying it's like everything else. Whereas now, because of TikTok and that community where people want to find that community of people who love the same kind of books and they want to find more of that kind of book that they love reading, I will go to my acquisitions meeting and say, this is about fake dating and it's about a morally great villain, or it's about, you know, enemies to lovers, and kind of use that kind of almost language of TikTok, you know, spicy as well, like we were saying before, is really feels like that's come out of TikTok as well. And of course, there's certain genres that have become popular because of TikTok too. And one that would come to mind would be the whole dark academia genre, which I had never heard before, but suddenly, you know, it's kind of everywhere. And the big question for us as publishers is trying to do that thing of looking in our crystal ball and looking ahead and, you know, is this a short-term trend, or is it something that will keep going so that we could find books, because we're, you know, we're publishing books for next year and the year after. How long will some of those trends be around?
Yeah, and what if TikTok gets banned? Who knows? But I think that's really interesting as well to say that you lead with the hook. You lead with the hook, which is meant to be kind of a behind the scenes, don't show the curtain of how I do this thing. But to say, here's my hook for my story, it's kind of like the elevator pitch. You know, it's a fake dating, dark academia. Oh, that sounds really good. Somebody write that. That's how you lead with. Is that accurate, Kate? Is that the way that TikTok is impacting, because you can't really rely on it to push millions of sales of books in Australia?
So I'd never thought about it like Zoe just edited it, but I think she's absolutely right. For me, I mean, I haven't seen the effect of TikTok on the Australian YA books that I'm publishing yet. So TikTok seems to be doing wonderful things for our adult romance backlist, but not so much for our local YA list yet. I guess the one thing I was thinking about in terms of TikTok and social media and how I acquire books is that I tend to think more about like video content opportunities now. I think in the past we used to do these quite stilted like Q&A with author things, and now more and more I'm thinking about like whether I can get some video content out of the cover design process and that kind of thing. And I think that is because of TikTok and Instagram, you know, Reels. And
yeah, that's really interesting. I will, for my interjection, I will say, if anyone's waiting for like a book that's only sold ANZ rights, Australia, New Zealand rights, to take off on TikTok, it probably won't, purely because of algorithm. It's not in our favor. There's 1 billion active users on TikTok, and I think 56 million of them are from the US and only 7 million are from Australia. So if there's a book that's only accessible in Australia, we've only got 7 million people to talk about it, versus the reason all of these books that become really big, Alice Oseman being an outlier who's UK, but she became big once Netflix, an American company, adapted Heartstopper. But most of the time they're American authors, because Americans have the numbers. The numbers are in their favor, to quote Suzanne Collins, another American author who's become very big on TikTok again, because The Hunger Games is again very popular. it's having the numbers in your favor. Australia is just never going to do that on TikTok because they have Silicon Valley and we don't. They have numbers and populations that we don't. But I do find it interesting that all of you are talking about how it's getting you to think differently about pitching books. And it's probably getting authors to think differently about leading with the behind the scenes trope, leading with their structure of their story and not being afraid to admit that, not being afraid to say it's inspired by the Wizard of Oz trope of going on this quest and gathering these various fairy godmother like individuals. Like, that's an interesting way to frame stories, I think, is the very social media led with the hook. I think that's really fascinating. But speaking of hooks, I'm going to bring it back to Anna very briefly, who touched on the trend, the early OO's trend of John Green, which was like a kind of sick lit trend for a little while. The Fault in Our Stars was labeled sick lit, but we've seen trends of vampires. We've seen trends of dystopian fiction. We've seen trends of anyone writing like John Green was a trend at some point. What are the current trends? Be that the hooks, is fake dating the current trend? Is it a particular genre that's trending? As Kate just said, the backlist of adult romance is perhaps pushing. And as you've spoken as well, Casey McQuiston's Red, White and Royal Blue, trying to kind of cosplay as a YA, but really it's just a romance for adults. What is trending, Anna? What are the genres that you're looking for right now? Because they're very trendful.
Oh gosh, I hate that you've come to me first on this. I've thought about this question a lot, and I don't know whether I am actually ever looking for something that fits a trend, perhaps because of what Zoe and Kate mentioned, is that we're publishing so far into the future. You know, I guess I always feel a bit scared about jumping on a trend, because you don't want to be the person with the 10-book vampire series when no one wants to read about vampires anymore. So so I guess the trend that all these things come down to, and I think it will continue, is authenticity, which is, I think social media is a kind of a real amplifier of that authentic voice, whether it's, you know, that person that you just feel like, you know, who maybe has some of your experiences, or whether it's the book that captures your experience in a way that you've not seen on the page before. I feel all of those things kind of dovetail quite nicely, and they help each other. So perhaps that's what I'm keeping in mind when I'm looking at submissions, is I'm looking for kind of new authentic voices that I haven't read before, because I feel like that's perhaps what we're aching for. I mean, I definitely think we're moving into a softer age. Like, I feel what we want from our entertainment is going to be softer. And I think that's why we want romances. I think we want to see people being kind to each other. But I mean, you know, like you've asked before, like, is this us? Is it me? Is it my taste? Is it the company taste? Is it my ability to read the marker? I actually don't know the answer to that. It may be a little bit of everything. I mean, I like to think my taste is informed by what I see happening, but you know, I don't really know the answer to that.
See, I think this is why it's a good thing that I'm not a publisher, because I would be acquiring all the vampire books and just hedging bets that vampires will come around in trend again. Is that the wrong impulse to take, Kate? Like, what do you think is trending? What are you currently looking for or not looking for, if that's the easier thing to answer? Is there a trend that's just dead like vampires? Is it not ever coming back?
Vampires are back, by the way, I think.
I knew it. I would be the publisher with the 10-book series I acquired 3 years ago, saying, I knew it, vindication.
Danielle, I never feel like I'm looking for a specific thing, to be honest, especially when it comes to YA. And often what I publish sort of surprises me. Like, I think for a while I sort of was taking the stance that I wasn't interested in seeing YA fantasy. And then I published this book by Lystra Rose, The Upwelling, which is fantasy. And it was, you know, the best experience. And now I absolutely am looking for YA fantasy. So one thing I will say is that I feel like we've seen YA authors playing around with the form of their books a bit more recently. So like verse novels and graphic novels. And I think that's awesome. I hope that sticks around. Besides that, I guess I feel like I'm still seeing quite a few YA thrillers come through submission, and YA horror, which I thought maybe had been and gone. But like Anna, I feel a lot of dread around the term trends. And I don't think I've ever particularly successfully published into any of them. So I don't even really bother anymore.
Perfect. You're just taking yourself out of the entire game. You do not have a crystal ball that you can use. Fair enough.
No
Zoe, does Zoe have a crystal ball? Do you know
Look,
the answer?
I did try, and I was, when I do these panels and I think, okay, what can I tell people about what is a trend? And I did think of a couple, but absolutely with that disclaimer of it's not necessarily what I'm looking for to publish in the next 2 years. But so, and I think what's really great about YA at the moment is that we're not dominated by that one trend, like it was all vampires and then it was all dystopian or it was all John Green. And I think it's allowing so much more of that variety of voices and authentic voices and all different kind of voices to really come through in YA. And I love what you said, Kate, about about books surprising you, because I think that's one of the greatest things about being a publisher is just seeing this incredible book come in that you had no idea you were looking for until you read it. But I did write down a couple. So one thing, and this has just come straight out of like Bologna Book Fair, which was just on in Italy, which is where all the children's publishers around the world gather. And also what I'm hearing from, rights people and publishers around the world is romantasy. And that's just come out this year. I mean, and it's kind of, well, yeah, we've already had romantic fantasy, so why does it need a new word? But there you go. That's one thing I'm hearing a lot about. And of course, I think that market, we already have quite a lot, there's a lot of authors writing that. So we have a lot that already fits that. And I think I'm always looking for, great romantic fantasy. So, I will keep looking for that. I do think graphic novels are a bit of a trend. And I know, Anna, you just mentioned you've got The Greatest Thing, which we've had on the Children's Book Council of Australia's shortlist this year. There's actually 2 YA graphic novels, including The Greatest Thing, and also Neverlanders, which I published, which is by Australian creators who are also kind of New York Times bestselling comic artists. And I think a lot of in YA has come from Heartstoppers, which I do actually think was a huge success, an outlying success before TikTok. I think, it was really, TikTok helped it along, Netflix obviously helped it along, but really it came out of nowhere and was just such a big success in that market. And there's such beautiful books. And I think, we're all looking for those kind of stories with those, diverse and inclusive voices and LGBT and, first relationships and all of that kind of thing. Of course, graphic novels is not something I would suggest you go out and write unless you are an incredible, author, illustrator, creator, because they're a huge resource as well, because, obviously with a book that long that is fully illustrated, it's a big thing. And the sales in Australia aren't quite there. We would love them to be there, but it's still growing. And because of kind of, I guess, how expensive they are to produce and to print, we have to be very careful about what we take on in that area. And then, as Kate said, I think the other trend that is still working for us, and again, this comes down to different companies sometimes, is at Penguin Random House, we obviously have a big international list. And one of the things that is biggest is still your kind of thrillers and murder mysteries like Karen McManus, and also the Inheritance Games, Jennifer Lynn Barnes. So and it can be really hard then to sign up local books in those genres when we've got those incredibly best-selling ones. I do have a really exciting debut YA author I'm going to be publishing later this year, who's got a really fantastic Australian kind of murder mystery kind of story. So yeah, I'm going to try that out and I think it'll be great.
Oh, I love that. Congratulations. No, I think that's wonderful. Our listeners may be very disgruntled that nobody hit on, yes, I've looked into my third eye and I can definitely tell you zombies, romances are the next big thing in precisely 2 years, but that's okay. I think what you're all saying, and I'm going to talk about diversity in YA and Australian YA next, but before we do that, I want to get to the topic of voice, which I think you all kind of spoke to and spoke around to a degree. When you said that you don't follow trends, what I often hear with that is you don't follow trends, but you can be persuaded by a great voice to a manuscript. Like it's voice before anything else. You don't go looking for, oh, I want a zombie murder mystery. You think I need a voice that's going to compel me. So my question is, what is voice? I mean, it's the most frustrating feedback and praise to give somebody when the feedback is, oh, the voice isn't quite working in YA. That can mean anything. It can mean this teenager sounds like a child, not a teenager. It can mean, oh, the perspective doesn't sound quite right. You've got it in first person, but maybe third person for the genre you're writing in might work a bit better. The point in time that we're meeting the protagonist in doesn't sound like we're in the meatiest part of the story. Voice is kind of everything. So, because she's going to love me for this, Kate.
No.
What is voice? And, you know, how can you improve voice? And what is the critique of voice? What are you talking about when you say that you love voice, you're looking for a great voice? What is voice?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm looking for, and this term has come up already in our discussion, is authenticity when it comes to the character. So I want to be completely immersed in this story where the character's reaction to every situation completely makes sense to me and makes sense to their age and their motivations and their life experience. And like you said, manuscripts kind of either have it or they don't. Sometimes it really works and it falters slightly in parts, and that's something that can be fixed. You can really pinpoint it and say like something like, well, you know, I feel like this character's dialogue is maybe out of step with their inner thoughts or, you know, even their education level or whatever it is. And maybe that can be fixed in that point in time in the manuscript. But if it's not there, if it's all over the place, that's sort of one of the biggest turnoffs, I guess, for me, for a manuscript. I feel like it's so important in YA.
Yeah. Do you agree, Anna? What is voice? How can you improve voice? What do you mean when you say I love the voice or I hate the voice? What is it?
Well, the word I would also use is authentic. So thank you, Kate. But to put it another way, I want to believe what I'm reading. So, you know, for someone who's, you know, someone who's out there and you're writing your novel and you might be working with some other people. Like I'd suggest you look at other people's manuscripts and stuff and have a look. But that's really what we're all looking for, is to believe what we're reading. So we want to feel, and I always look for that experience that I feel like I'm not an editor. I don't feel like I'm a publisher. I'm actually just in the world of the book. Like I've forgotten that I'm reading something. I'm just there. That's that kind of suspension of disbelief, that sort of magical transition. That's voice, I guess. Not just about character. It's kind of about, it's about the narrative voice taking you through. It can be third person, it can be first person. That's
I think that's great. That's something like, you know, the voice of Marcus Zusak's The Book Thief being Death as our narrator. I don't really believe that I'm listening to Death narrating this story to me, but it's because the world of the book believes it, because I'm in this world and I completely believe that, of course, death is this spectre hanging over the events of World War II and the Holocaust. Absolutely. So, you know, there's a kind of commitment that authenticity to voice within the story, I think, is really compelling as well. And finding the right voice for the story, finding the right protagonist, the right narrator, and the thing that I think brings your talents together, like making sure that you sound like yourself as a writer. Do you agree, Zoe? There's a degree of, you can't kind of fake this. This has to be, to a degree, natural, but also learned, and it takes practice. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could tell you what voice was when I say, you know, the voice isn't right, but it's one of those questions of, I know it when I see it. And it is about exactly all those things we've been talking about, like being authentic, but also the voice that surprises me, the voice that feels fresh, the voice that compels me. And to give a couple of examples, it's what makes your book, what makes your book the book no one else could have written. And so, for instance, when I talk about tropes, and we just published Anne Liang's This Time It's Real, and it's fake dating trope, but it's also, Anne Liang is a Chinese Australian, it's set in Beijing, it's kind of got the world of sea dramas and all of this stuff in there that only Anne could have told that story. It's absolutely fantastic. And this debut novel that I've got coming out later this year called Eleanor Jones Is Not a Murderer, by Amy Doak.
Great title.
Yeah, it was the voice that grabbed us. It actually was a book that came from the slush pile and in fact, one of our editors saw the title and went, oh, okay, that looks interesting, and could not stop reading it because it's got this, Eleanor Jones, who's the narrator, it's a murder mystery, but it's funny as anything. And it's just this incredibly sassy voice. And, it's kind of self-deprecating, but also really smart and kind of just this fantastic voice that absolutely grabbed us and made us really desperate to publish this book.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really a great way to think of it as well. You can have a plethora of writers writing in the same genre, but it's their unique perspective of the world and how they come to the page that is what's going to differentiate them. So you can say John Green and Melina Marchetta are both writing YA contemporary. They sound very different because they've been influenced by their own backgrounds, by the setting, by the characters they've chosen. So they have their own distinctive voices, and the voices aligned to the characters. I think that's brilliant. But we still haven't answered the question of voice, and that's because it is everything. It is all encompassing. It is too hard. It is much like Death, the narrator itself. It's too big and all encompassing. So let's just put that aside for now. I'm going to come back to you, Zoe, on the question of, let's acknowledge that for most of human history, literature has been very white, heteronormative, able-bodied, nuclear family driven, particularly in the YA space. And I'm curious to know how much Australia is embracing a need for more diverse books to reflect the world that kids actually live in and have lived in for far longer than we've probably been publishing recognition of that. But is there a broadening of who is represented, but is it happening quickly enough as well? What do you think, Zoe?
Oh, such a big question again, but I think every Australian publisher is going to tell you that we are looking to broaden our list and make sure that we're reflecting the breadth and depth of Australian society and all of the different people who are here, whether it's First Nations and, or people or, disability or neurodiversity or LGBTQI plus stories. All of those voices are so important. And it's a very big part of what we look for. And different publishers will have different strategies because it's a long-term project. It's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of things we're all doing. For instance, one of the things Penguin Random House is doing is we've got the Write It Fellowship, which is to kind of nurture and develop unpublished writers across all genres with a focus on underrepresented sections of the community. And it's really exciting that we've actually got a YA novel coming out later this year from Sydney Koo, who has written this book called The Spider and Her Demons, which is this fabulous urban fantasy spin on growing up as a second generation immigrant and, feeling trapped inside your own body. Absolutely fabulous. And it was actually one of the first recipients of a Write It Fellowship. So we're so excited to have that coming out in the market. But there's all sorts of ways that publishers are working towards finding those new voices because they often don't come through traditional sources like an agent or, it is about finding new ways to find those voices and develop writers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, can you comment on this as well? What Hachette is doing, what you're doing, how open you are to accepting diverse voices? As I think Zoe said, everyone's on the lookout for diverse voices in recognition that there hasn't always been this swath of them available to the public for such a long time.
Yeah. So I think across the industry, everyone's embracing the need for more diverse books. Mm-hmm. And I think you can see it in, what we've been publishing over the last 5 years, all publishers, and also in prize shortlistings. I think it's really great seeing lots of diverse books end up on those. Yeah. So Hachette is working very closely with the Black and White editors at State Library Queensland. So I got to publish this beautiful book, got some show and tell. So this is The Upwelling by Lystra Rose. So that came through Black and White, and Black and White means that First Nations authors can work closely with a First Nations editor before, being acquired in-house. And is it happening fast enough? I think my answer is no. That yes, we're taking steps and that's awesome. But change is hard. And I think that it's not just finding more diverse books, it's also making sure that the processes you have in place in-house tailored towards diverse authors, you know, like not all processes work for all authors. And so I think it's like an ongoing learning experience, and I think we're stepping in the right direction, and let's just keep on stepping and you know, keep going, I guess.
Very true. It's a hard ship to steer, the entirety of publishing. Is it the same at Allen and Unwin, Anna?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, to say, yes, we're not publishing, we're not moving fast enough. And a lot of the change, I think, has to come internally. It has to be, you know, there have to be cultural and changes inside the buildings themselves. Yeah. Allen and Unwin has lots of different things that we are doing to make the workplace more equitable and diverse, as well as to support diverse writers and voices. We have the Voices from the Intersection project. We have a First Nations support I don't know what we call it actually. Is it a fellowship where we do work with people who've come through the unsolicited or come to us who are First Nations background, who want to work on their manuscript. We will support that. We'll choose a couple of years to support and let them have a development process, because it may not be ready to acquire, but it has something interesting in it, and we want to be able to support the voice with no obligation to us or for them to continue to work with us. We have a lot of protocols now. We've developed protocols over the years to make sure that we create culturally safe environments for authors of marginalised backgrounds to be published with us, because there's a lot of unintentional bias that happens, and unintentional racism and intentional racism, and there's a lot to fight against, and we know we take it very seriously, and we need more change. We need more inclusion, more diversity. It's just no doubt.
Yeah, and I think what Zoe said as well, we're dealing with bigger structures than just publishing. A lot of structures are not in favour of diverse voices. So the fact that, for instance, it's really hard to get a degree in arts and humanities at the moment because they are so expensive, and previous governments have categorised them that way so that they are shutting out an entire segment of society from being able to study the arts and humanities, which is one very traditional way that publishers have found new voices, is from people that do writing programs, submit to publishers or agents, and then have a foot in that door. And not everyone can have that same pathway. So there's lots of other structures in place that need to kind of not topple entirely, though I don't mind if that happens with some of them, but there's an acknowledgement that we have to have like a broader field, have to have a broader net. We've got to acknowledge that there are different ways to become an author and to learn writing. The number one is always going to be reading, interacting with books, audiobooks, graphic novels, all of the above. So I think that's really wonderful that each of your publishers and all publishers in Australia are taking methods and means, but it is slow going because it's not just the architecture of publishing, it's a whole lot of other pathways that have been blocked for so long historically. But, this chat is one really fantastic and accessible way because it's a free online event that's going to be visually and accessible for many people across Australia, which is wonderful and fantastic. I think we just sort of got to keep acknowledging that we need to be aware of the barriers that are in place and keep trying to knock them down, or at least being open to hearing about them so we can start addressing them, which I think is really important. So now let's head toward the tail end of this chat. And I think I'd like to go into the last section about people trying to approach you all. Since we're talking about swapping down barriers and making it more accessible to approach you if you're a diverse author especially, let's talk about trying to get books published by your publishing houses. And I think Anna touched on this before, but as a first question, how much of what you're looking for your list is your personal taste, and how much is what your Wizard of Oz-esque overlords and your various publishing houses have dictated you are to start acquiring? Like, what is the balance there of, you have to acknowledge that there are some genres that you're just not very capable or interested in looking for, where do you kind of look for commercial sensibilities versus your own personal preferences, Anna?
So I've got no restrictions on what I can acquire. So apart from, obviously, I publish onto the children's and YA list. So there's no preference from the management team of what they want me to look for. So that's great. On top of that, I am always thinking about what we are good at selling, because obviously I'm looking for things that I know that we know how to make successful. So I have that in my mind. I mean, I find it really interesting that the only science fiction and fantasy that Allen and Unwin publish comes out of the children's and YA list. And yet I mean, we're phenomenally successful with it. Like and it reaches readers that are not all teenagers. So we have Margot Lanigan and Sean Tam and Amy Kaufman, Jake Kristoff, Garth Nix. I mean, all these people who we publish, you know, really for a general market. But that only comes out of the children's list. So what that tells me too is that there's a lot of personal taste driving it as well, and personal reading experience. And I always say that I think one of the reasons that Allen Unwin's children's division is so good at publishing fantasy and science fiction is because Eva Mills, our publishing director, is a huge fan. So she's read really broadly across the genre. It continues to read, it reads all the new books. So, you know, we have this kind of rich knowledge base that we talk to about the things that we read. So, you know, we have that kind of, there's sort of, you know, rewarding discussions about manuscripts as they come in, as we compare them to other things that have, you know, happened before. So there is that as well. And then of course there's just my own personal, you know, biases, but I'm a generalist, so I always see myself as someone who I love lots of different things. So I love really commercial romance. I love really, you know, beautiful, heartbreaking literary novels. You know, I read crime fiction. I read, you know, fantasy. You know, I read science fiction. So, you know, I try and read everything too. That's to make sure that I am this generalist, but you know, not everyone is. Some people love to be kind of the specialist, but yeah, definitely I see my role as the generalist on the team.
That's so true about adult publishing. We should really sit them down on a panel somewhere and say, what's your beef with fantasy and sci-fi? Why do you leave it all to the kids? I'm sure there's some really great adult sci-fi and fantasy writers out there. But Zoe, I saw you nodding along as well. How much of your list is your personal preference and how much is overlords, which is what we kindly, lovingly call your superiors, your management team?
Oh, look, I kind of agreed with everything Anna said, right down to what she loves reading and how she's a generalist, because in fact, I originally moved into children's and YA publishing because I was an adult books editor and we didn't have enough fantasy for me to work on. And also I just loved YA. I love contemporary, you know, so I think the way I would say it is that I can always publish a book most successfully when I feel passionately about it and when I'm super excited to just get out there and talk about this book. And so my taste does come into it because it's obviously the book that I have to really feel it for that book, feel the love. And that's why you'll often see us coming back and saying, I'm saying no to your submission because I just didn't love it enough to do all of that work that we need to do to champion a book. But I think the other thing is, and of course we all know, you know, there can be different people, oh, you know, this person doesn't like reading fantasy or whatever it is. People have different preferences. But I think in a publishing house, the great thing is we're kind of working with that trust and respect for each other's knowledge. So, you know, if I get a manuscript in and I think, oh, you know, this person's got such a deep knowledge and love of, you know, true crime, or not that we do true crime in YA, but, you know, murder mysteries, whatever it is, then I will get that person to read it and see, because obviously having that deep knowledge is important. But the other thing that's important is respecting and understanding that knowledge that, for instance, the sales team have about what Big W is looking for at the moment, or what sells really well, what isn't selling, you know, what covers are working. So it's that whole idea of combining all of our different experiences and knowledge to have a look at each proposal on its merits, and not just say, when I take a book to acquisitions, we're not just saying, did I like it, but, you know, where will it sell? How many will it sell? What is it that we love about it? Because sometimes we do get a book through based on that passion. We might think that, look, the sales might not be huge for this book. They might, you know, it might be a smaller title, but it's a gem, and I must publish this book, you know, and so it's really exciting when that happens. But it's also super exciting when you get to an acquisitions meeting and everyone loves the book and wants to publish it because it's just, you know, such a fantastic book.
Yeah. Kate, how much is your Hachette YA list your personal library, and how much is it you're listening to the shoppers of Big W? What is the balance you have?
So I kind of agree with everything Zoe and Anna have said on this. So I don't really have specific things that, you know, sales want me to go out and find. But if I don't have the passion for it, then I'm not going to be able to sell it in an acquisitions meeting. And if I can't sell it to sales, then sales can't sell it to booksellers, and, you know, booksellers can't sell it to readers. And that, you know, that's kind of how it filters down. So I am a generalist too, and I have just like a huge respect for a compelling voice and a story that's well told, whatever the genre and whatever the themes. So in the past, I will say this, I think in the past, I have desperately wanted to publish a book and tried to push it through acquisition, but without the support from everyone else in the team, I don't think it's worth it. Like, I think I'm doing the author a disservice to, you know, to acquire a book that just because I want it, because really everyone needs to want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you are all readers as well, and you can't force yourself to love something that you just don't. That if you were at a library or at a bookshop, you would probably look at the blurb and put it back down again. You can't force yourself to take on everything. You have to have that passion for it, and then look for that passion within your own teams as well. So it's kind of, you know, a multifaceted, multi-layered endeavor. But now let's get into like the last 4 questions, semi-rapid fire, but not really. Take your time if you want to, it's okay. We're going to go to the best piece of advice that you can give querying writers, beginning with Zoe. Best piece of advice for querying writers.
I'm going to go with be professional. And by that, I do not mean wear a suit. I just mean do your research about the publisher, all of the things that you can do. Every interaction you have with a publisher or editor, whether it's that submission letter, meeting a publisher at a manuscript assessment or an event, or what you say online, it all counts towards when we look at you. We're not just looking at your book, we're looking at you as well, and how we, you know, do we want to work with you? I have authors who I've met at, you know, writers' conferences over the years, and I do tuck them away in my mind if I think that person was so friendly and had so, you know, such great ideas, and that book might not have been right, but I really want to work with that person at some point. And it has actually happened, like, you know, maybe 5 years later, that person writes the right book that I can really get behind and my team can get behind. So absolutely, you know, from your submission letter to when you interact with publishers, keep it professional.
I like that. Anna, what do you think?
I like that answer too, but my answer was different. My answer is read. So
no, surely not.
I think you should listen to Zoe, everyone. But I have been surprised by the kind of the lack of depth of reading of some people who are trying to write. And I think, you know, if you haven't read widely in the area that you want to write in, you need to question yourself why. Like, maybe you're not writing in the right genre. Maybe if you really love reading murder mysteries, maybe you should be writing a murder mystery, not writing a literary novel about finding yourself. Like, but I just think read widely, and you can't go wrong with that.
I do like that. As someone who also teaches creative writing at RMIT University, the first question I ask all of my classes is, what is your favorite book or the last book that you read? And if there's crickets on both of those answers, I kind of look them down and say, you know, this is a writing class. I don't know what to tell you. There's going to be some reading involved, and you should probably enjoy reading yourself, just as an idea. Kate, what's your best piece of advice for querying writing?
I love both of those answers. Mine is to do your research on the Australian market. So to know where your book sits, what's working in the market currently, and to give me some Australian comparison titles.
Yes, you can't just say that you're like Colleen Hoover because she sold 20 million copies. We're going to see through that ruse. We are going to see through it. I'm sorry to tell you. Okay, next rapid fire for Zoe leading us off. What is, and I think it may have been in your previous answer, but what is the biggest mistake querying writers can make? What is their biggest don't do that?
Well, I was actually going to say the one that you just talked about, Danielle, which is the don't compare yourself too highly or at too general a level. Like, don't say you're the next Hunger Games. Don't say you're the next Harry Potter. Anything that's at that phenomenal level, it just sets up the expectations in the reader. So, but what you can do is, like Kate said, say, you know, my books might sit alongside these titles on the shelf, and they have to be realistic as well. The other thing is, don't address your submissions to HarperCollins if you're writing to Penguin Random House, or, you know, vice versa. Make sure you check those letters and do that research, like Kate said.
Yeah, I like that. I agree with the very first one. So many people submit to me as well, say, because they're writing an Eastern European-esque fantasy, they always say like Leigh Bardugo. And I just think, oh, that tells me that you haven't read widely enough in this subgenre of what's happening in fantasy. You can only reach for the most popular title, but you're comparing yourself to somebody who's at the very top of their game. And if you're not reaching those same heights, I'm going to read this and think, oh, it's no Leigh Bardugo. Instantly, it's hard.
I would add to that as well. The other on the other side, don't say there's nothing else out there like my book, because there's nothing that challenges a publisher more than when someone says that. And I think, well, there's this one and there's this one and there's this one. So again, it just shows that you don't know the market and you haven't done the research.
Yeah, you're setting yourself up for like a pub quiz list of here's what you're actually sounding like without realizing it. Very true. Anna, what is your advice for don't do this?
On top of that, I would say don't diss the books that we publish. So don't tell me that your book is just like another book I've published, only that one really sucked and yours is amazing, because I'm going to be a little bit offended.
Yeah.
So,
I think
because I might not agree with you, right?
Funnily enough, mocking my profession, not the best way to endear yourself to me. Good advice, Kate. What's your advice for what not to do?
Look, I think Zoe stole mine. It's just it's not knowing the market or being unprofessional. But I'm going to add something to my list of best advice, if that's all right, instead. So this one's a little bit tricky to do, but if you can like know exactly which books I've published personally, like if you can be looking through acknowledgement sections of other YA books and finding my name, like I know that's a big ask, but that's like bonus points, you know, like to really target it to me specifically rather than, you know, the publishing company more generally.
Yes, I think that's always a really great tip, is to, if you think that you're like a similar author and their book, go to that book, read the acknowledgements, see who their agent was, see who their publisher was, see who they thank in the acknowledgements of Australian titles. It's not going to, it's way too big for the American stuff. But if you cite Danielle Binks to Kate, she may very well say, another Danielle Binks, I would love more of that. Thank you. My other question for you all, to begin with Zoe again, do writers, I'm going to make this a two-part question. Do writers that approach you have to come via an agent, and do they have to have huge numbers of social media followers in the tens of millions in order to get in the door to you? So do you need an agent, and do you need a huge online social media following in order to be seen by you, Zoe Walton?
Okay, so first, no, you don't need an agent, but it can help. And the one thing I would say here is, if you think that an agent will help you, whether it's with the business side of things or just having that support person on your team, do that before you start submitting to publishers, because an agent is not going to want to hear that you have already sent it to all of the Australian publishers. We do have unsolicited submissions. There's lots of other ways to meet publishers as well. For instance, look for literary speed dating events or pitching events at kind of writers' conferences like KidLit Vic or CYA in Brisbane. There's just various writers' organizations around the States. And I love going to meet authors at those. And we do call in manuscripts that we're interested in from those. In terms of the social, the platform, I don't think we're going to find many Australian authors who have tens of millions of followers, although, of course, a part of our publishing at Penguin Random House is about finding those influencers or those people with big platforms who buy books. So we're
Mhm.
definitely looking for those, but that's different as well to the, if you've written a YA manuscript and you don't have that platform, don't be worried, because what social media is about doing what works for you, because social media is a big commitment and you need to do what feels natural for you and what will help you. And, you know, but you can go out there and look at, there are authors who've built wonderful fan communities who follow them, like Lynette Noni. Her fans will do anything for her and they will buy 5 different, you know, editions of her books because they love her so much. But and she interacts with them online. She does, you know, she loves getting out there and meeting her fans and that kind of thing. There's, you know, other people like Tobias Madden's got a really fantastic, you know, Instagram where he talks about publishing and his books and just his life. Do what's right for you. Go out there and see what different people are working, you know, are doing on their platforms, and see, you know, what would feel right for you, because maybe you're not a TikTok person, you know, maybe something else is right for you. But keep in mind that these things change as well over time.
Anna, do you need an agent? Do you need to have millions of followers to see you?
No. So
Okay.
I think publishers have never been more available than they are now, because everyone can work out our email addresses. We all have portals that are open to anyone to submit through. They're all much faster than they used to be. When I started in the industry, we received, you know, printouts with stamped self-addressed envelopes to return things. So, you know, like there was a room filled with things that had not been read for years. So, you know, like it's much more efficient. And the other part of your question was, so you don't need an agent?
Social media. Do you need to
Social
have
media. Okay,
millions?
So I think you don't need to have one. If you do have a really strong social media presence, you definitely should let us know. And I would encourage all people who are thinking of writing for teenagers to think of a way of how you would best like to communicate with them, because we see there is an absolute relationship between authors who connect to their readers and to sales. So publishers are always, well, we're always looking for that. But it has to be authentic to you, as I said. It has to be something that you feel really is you know, easy for you to do and feels like your voice, because, you know, you're only going to be successful at it if it feels natural, and it takes up a lot of time. But it may not be social media, and you might be someone who loves going into schools. You might have a teaching background, you know, you can go back and do it that way too. But I just think set yourself up as you know, work out how you're going to communicate with teenagers, and try and pursue that as well.
The big hint you gave was the use of the word voice again. It always comes back to voice one way or another. Kate, do you need an agent? And can you just be a JD Salinger reclusive type that doesn't even know what TikTok is?
So no and yes. So no, you don't need an agent. I think agents are worth their weight in gold, but I don't feel like there's probably enough of them in Australia to cater for all the writers. So yes, many of my writers are unagented, and that's absolutely fine. I try and get along to manuscript assessments, like at CYA and Kid Lit Vic, and, you know, the speed dating stuff that Zoe mentioned. Partly because I really like hearing about manuscripts from the author, you know, face to face. I think my submissions inbox gets really overwhelming, and it's nice to just sit down with someone and hear about what they're writing. Social media platforms. Look, it gives me an extra talking point in an acquisitions meeting. And as Anna mentioned, it gives you a way to connect with your readers, which gives the author away, which is brilliant. But no, it's not a deal breaker for me. And more important than followers, I feel, is finding an author who is keen and able and willing to get up in front of rooms filled with, you know, children or teenagers, you know, at conferences or, you know, festivals like Brisbane Writers Festival, like this one here. So that to me is probably the most important thing when it comes to platform.
Are you suggesting that if you want to write for teenagers, you yourself may have to go back to high school I think everyone should be absolutely aware that that is a possibility if they want this as a career trajectory. Now, I did promise this was going to be the very last question, but I actually want to ask you all truly rapid fire to round up. And I want to thank you all for talking to me today. I could have gone for another hour, but as a special treat, I'd like each of you to name one title that you want everyone to put on their to be read pile that is being published by you soon, shortly, eventually. Maybe it's already out and you just want to tell more people about it. We're going to start with Zoe because I just saw Anna looking at her shelves bewildered. So, but I think Zoe has already rapid fired off quite a few titles. But what is the one that you want everyone to put onto their Goodreads to be read? Zoe Walton.
Oh, look, I think I've already mentioned it. This one, we're so excited about Eleanor Jones Is Not a Murderer, coming out in September. So definitely put that on your Goodreads.
Can you send that one to me? That sounds amazing. Kate, next, what is the one book that you want people to read?
It's Grace Notes. It's the first verse novel I published. I loved every minute of working on this book. It's so fun to read. Yeah, I would grab a copy if I were you.
Full disclosure, Karen Comer, who wrote Grace Notes, is my author that I represent. So there you go. Some agents do get a foot in the door for you. Anna, what is the book that you want to tell people to read?
Oh, okay. I'm going to tell you that Amy Kaufman is coming out with her first solo YA next month, and it is outstanding, and it is a pure example of romantasy because it is romantic, it is a fantasy, and it is also set on the sea. So you can imagine the fun we're going to have with the play on words there. So yeah, the Eye of the Gods, Amy Kaufman.
Anna, I do get seasick, but I'm willing to suppress it for Amy Kaufman. Anything that she's written, can I get that one sent to me as well? Thank you all so much for chatting with me today. And thank you, Brisbane Writers Festival, for making this session free to the public and for letting us just gab together. It's been really fun. And sorry that we went over time, Emily. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks, Danielle.